So, for my informative speech, I chose to talk about sweatshops because this is a huge issue that not many people know about, and I also have my roommate Allie listening to my speech. So, what they are is they're factories used by retailers to quickly produce products. People are employed at extremely low rates, and they work such long hours, and they work in very poor conditions. So, what they are, the U.S. Department of Labor describes them as a factory that violates two or more labor laws. They have extremely poor working conditions, they get paid very little wages, definitely not enough to live on, especially with a family, which most of these people do have. And a lot of these factories in a lot of countries even use child labor. In many undeveloped countries, around 168 million kids aged 5 to 14 are forced to work. Fortunately, the US does have stricter laws on these factories than more undeveloped countries do, so there's not a lot of child labor in the US, but there are still a lot of sweatshops. The most common products made in sweatshops are clothing, bricks, coffee, cotton, and cocoa. So, a little more about sweatshops. A study shows that doubling the salary of sweatshop workers would only increase the consumer cost of an item by 1.8%, which is so little compared to the consumers willing to pay 15% more just to know that the product didn't come from a sweatshop. The majority of child laborers are found in Asia and the Pacific. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest prevalence, with 1 in 5 children in child labor, which is a huge margin. According to one survey, more than 2/3 of U.S. workers experienced at least one pay-related violation in the previous work week. Assuming full-time, full-year work schedules, workers lose an average of $2,634 just due to violations, which really doesn't help them because they make so little to begin with. And because women make up 85 to 90% of sweatshop workers, some employers even force them to take birth control and routine pregnancy tests just to avoid having to support maternity leave or providing them any appropriate health benefits. So I watched this TED Talk, and this woman had gone to China to interview people in the factories and just go with them into work and see what it was like. And she was working one-on-one with this woman. She came to the conclusion that people really do not choose to have this job. It's really just what's available for them where they live. Many families even need the help of their child to work because the little money they make barely gets them any necessities. In the factory she went to in China, they would actually live there, so there was about 10 to 15 people in one room, 50 people sharing one bathroom, and the speaker compared them to jail cells. The young girl said her title was quality control, but she actually had no clue what her real job was, and I feel like they just have her as quality control just to say that they have someone with that title. And when she went around asking people what they did, many of them could not explain what their actual job title was or what they actually did for a job. So more about the TED Talk. A worker would have to wage out 2.5 months just to afford the iPhone that he was making on the assembly line. There's 150 million workers in these Chinese factories, and 1/3 of them are women. One example this woman found while looking in the Chinese factories, so Coach calls themselves an American classic, even though they're produced in Chinese sweatshops, which is extremely false advertising. This woman that worked in the sweatshops used to work in a handbag one, and she gave the woman who went to interview her a little wallet, and she pulled out the card that comes with Coach bags, and it was all about Coach's history and how their bags were made by, 10 or 12 people and extremely handmade and cared for, and she realized how false that advertising truly is because it just came out of a sweatshop. So these charts show how much hourly people make in different places. So, for example, Bangladesh, people only make 13 cents an hour. And the highest one I see is Costa Rica, which is $2.38, and that's the highest hourly wage that there is for these factories. And then the second table shows people living on less than $1 a day and $2 a day. So the majority of people definitely live on less than $2 a day. which is so little, especially when many of these people have families to be supporting and feed. And then I watched a second documentary of these kids from, I believe they're from Norway, and they went to live with this woman who worked in the factories, and they just wanted to experience what it was like, and they were actually put to work to truly experience what it was like instead of just reading about it. The woman that they stayed with, she makes $130 a month, and people where she lives hold protests just for $160 a month, just for a $30 raise a month. And they often become very violent. There was videos within the documentary of these actual protests. And these protesters were just standing there, and they would get attacked by the police, and it was truly very sad. So she pays $50 a month for rent, and her house was extremely tiny. The kids were comparing them to their bathroom at home. They were like, this house is smaller than my bathroom. Some factories are 5 days a week, hers is 7 days a week. They find it weird to see prices. She went to a store and she saw a blouse that she had sewed one just like it, and she couldn't even afford the blouse. She said the blouse is the price of her rent or how much she spends on food a month. Most of her money is spent on food. People bargain at markets, but people actually still die of starvation. There was an interview with this woman, and her mother actually passed away just because of starvation. Many faint of starvation and dehydration within the factories as well. She buys clothes once or twice a year, and she only allows herself to spend $4 on her clothes. So again, she goes to these markets and bargains for these used clothes. She also saw a coat in a store, and she said the coat that she saw would cost her an entire 1 year's salary. She dreamt of being a doctor when she was little, but she had to quit school at a primary level because many people can't afford education for themselves. And there's many people that work in these factories that had huge dreams of education and getting a real job, and they just can't because they can't even afford the education. They are also not told how many hours they're going to sew when they show up to work. They just start working. So how to change this issue? The issue is so global that there's no way to completely get rid of this issue quickly. Companies could take more ownership for how they treat employees and start doing something about it. Like I said, with the margin of paying the people more would only raise the price 1.5% to consumers. It's definitely something that they could do. And these employees don't expect much at all. They expect a small pay raise, maybe have fans in the factory, and be fed. So what you can do you can shop American made or only sweatshop free products. You can shop in thrift stores, and you can also inform others about this issue, which is why I made this presentation, because many people are not aware of it. Although, for example, American Apparel was an all-American made brand produced in the U.S., and it just had to be so expensive because it's so expensive to produce products here that they went out of business. So companies that use sweatshops are places like Nike, Victoria's Secret, H&M, Calvin Klein, most places that we shop. Some American-produced places are New Balance, LL Bean, Patagonia, Lush, and Everlane. It was actually pretty hard to find a solid list of American-produced products. So why they exist? They really just exist because large corporations use them to get their products done faster and cheaper, to get that speed to market that they need. The U.S. imports a lot more than they export because it's just so much cheaper to import goods than to produce them in the country. Some countries have been trying to change the way they go about this by either paying more, creating better work conditions, or making products in the country. And that's my presentation on sweatshops.